Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Eddie Mandry, and I serve as Director for Africa and the Middle East at Yale University. Thanks for joining this important conversation, which I'm confident will advance our understanding of the role of regional bodies in addressing decline of democratic practice in Western Africa. This event is emblematic of the Yale Africa Initiative's commitment to open and free discourse on some of the most pressing issues presenting around the continent of Africa. The Africa Initiative, a university-wide effort to refocus and strengthen and elevate Yale's research, teaching, learning, and discourse on Africa, is steeped in partnership, a philosophy of mutual engagement and bidirectionality. It was launched in 2013 by Yale University President Peter Salovey at his inauguration. This event also happens to be taking place on Yale Africa Week. So this week on our campus is Africa Week, and we are fortunate to have with us Chibuzo Enelema, President of the Yale African Students Association. She will set this session in motion by introducing our keynote speakers. Chibuzo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. So for this event today, we are joined by two distinguished keynote speakers and three remarkable panelists. The first keynote speaker is His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Jilde Diallo, Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. He's a political and governance specialist with extensive work experience with the United Nations and other international institutions working on peace and security issues. He started his professional career in the United Nations in March 2000, working as a program officer at the United Nations in Kosovo. Until he assumed the office of Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, he was a senior advisor at the United Nations Civilization Mission in Mali. His extensive experience allowed him to support the mission's leadership in enhancing the stability challenges in Mali and the Sahel, including the Algerian-led mediation processes of the Malian crisis. Our second keynote speaker is His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Ibn Chambers. He's the former special representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel. Before joining the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, he was the African Union United Nations Joint Special Representative for Darfur and head of the African Union United Nations Hybrid Operation in Darfur. From 2010 to 2012, Mr. Chambers was the Secretary General of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group of States. He served as President of the Economic Community of West African States between 2006 to 2009, and Executive Secretary between 2002 to 2005. As a former member of the Parliament of Ghana, Dr. Chambers served as the Deputy Foreign Secretary of Ghana in 1987 and Deputy Minister for Education in charge of tertiary education from 1997 to 2000. On the panelist side, our first panelist is Idayat Hassan, Director of the Center for Democracy and Development in West Africa and a 2015 Yale Greenberg World Fellow. The second panelist is Kate Baldwin, an Associate Professor of Political Science here at Yale University. The third panelist is Udo Jude Ilo, who is head of the Nigeria Office for the Open Society Initiative for West Africa and a 2021 Yale Greenberg World Fellow. Distinguished keynote speakers and panelists, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Chibuzo, for that very kind introduction. And so now, if our distinguished speaker is ready, we will ask His Excellency Mohamed Jilde Diallo to offer his keynote address. So unfortunately, His Excellency Mohamed Ibn Chambers couldn't be here in person, but he has a recorded message that he's recorded to share with our audience. And so maybe we'll begin with that.
Your Excellency, the Vice President of Sierra Leone, my brother Mohamed Jilde, the Director of the Yale Macmillan African Center, organizers of this important webinar meeting on the role of regional bodies in addressing democracy decline in West Africa. Dear friends, let me apologize that I'm unable to be with you live for today's important seminar. I am actually now in Banjul, the Gambia, where I am chairing the signing ceremony by 6 presidential candidates in Gambia's December 4th election of a code of conduct. That ceremony is ongoing now as you are having this discussion. So please excuse me that I'm unable to be with you personally. But regarding the topic and the discussion, one cannot but agree with the suggestion that democracy in West Africa region is on a decline, given the gains that the region made over the first 2 decades in the advent of democracy from the early 70s. Now, in the recent Democracy Index rankings released on October 21st, 2021, the Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU, categorizes countries into 4 types according to the regimes, namely full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regimes, authoritarian regimes. The index is based on 5 sets of criteria, namely A, electoral processes and pluralism, B, civil liberties, C, the functioning of government, D, political participation, and E, political culture. Unfortunately, none of the countries in West Africa, according to the EIU, can be termed as fully democratic. Instead, of the 15 countries, only 2, Ghana and Cape Verde, are classified as flawed democracies, while 7 countries, Senegal, Liberia, Benin, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, are termed as hybrid. 6 countries, Mali, Togo, Niger, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau are classified as authoritarian. The indication is that the region is doing poorly in respect to its democratic values, as the trend of the indices look downwards. Even the countries that are seen to be doing well are scoring lower marks than the previous years. Likewise, everywhere in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic also offered reasons for silencing dissenting voices in West Africa. And this has been witnessed during the electoral processes of 2020 and 2021. The Mo Ibrahim Index and Freedom in the World Report of 2020 corroborates the narrative that sub-Saharan Africa's democratic governance trajectory is sliding, and West Africa is no exception. The situation in the sub-region is surprisingly worse as it deteriorated faster compared to the rest of Africa, marked by processes leading to manipulation of constitutions, to extend term limits, instrumentalization of the justice system, electoral systems that hamper participation of potential candidates and voters as well, excessive abuse of incumbency, state capture, and monetization of politics. Over the last few years, a lot has happened impacting negatively on the general outlook of democracy in West Africa region. The actions and inactions of political leaders in particular appear to accentuate this trend by creating the necessary conditions that contribute to the decline in democratic tenets. Mention here should be made of recent constitutional changes and upheavals that have been witnessed in Benin, in La Côte d'Ivoire, in Guinea, and in Mali. Indeed, the situation in Guinea and in Mali deteriorated to the point where the military have had to step in, ushering in coup d'etats, which we had thought would have been a thing of the past in the West Africa region. West Africa has been one of the sub-regions which through ECOWAS has established norms and legal frameworks for anchoring peace building and the process of democratization. I'm referring to, among others, the 1991 ECOWAS Declaration on Political Principles on Freedom, People's Rights, and Democratization. The 1993 ECOWAS Revised Treaty, particularly in its Article 4, the 1999 ECOWAS Protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, peacekeeping, and security, and the 2001 ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on democracy and good governance, among others. All these groundbreaking legal frameworks ensure that all member states within the ECOWAS region, which were under dictatorial regimes, transited into constitutional democracies. When I assumed office as Chief Executive of ECOWAS in 2001, practically all the heads of state, certainly a majority of the heads of state, were military rulers. By the time I left the organization in 2010, all the presidents of the sub-region were elected presidents. But just as one was expecting that after 2 decades of democracy, most of these countries would move from transitional to consolidated democracies, the tide appears to be rolling back, eroding years of democratic dividends and the region has enjoyed until recently. It is gratifying to note, however, that during one of its recent extraordinary summits on the political and security situation in Mali and Guinea, held on 16 September 2021 in Accra, Ghana, the Authority of Heads of State and Government of ECOWAS has identified the consolidation of democracy and good governance as crucial for development, peace, and stability of the region. Consequently, the authority has tasked the ECOWAS Commission to, as a matter of urgency, initiate a process for the review of the 2001 ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance in response to the declining trend of democracy, which poses security and stability threats to the region. It is envisaged that the reviewed protocol will address such emerging threats to democracy and its tenets, particularly the respect for tenure limits, rule of law, judicial independence, independence of election management bodies, civil liberties, and to strengthen the sanctions regime in the protocol in order to adequately respond to the exigencies of times. The attempt by the ECOWAS region to initiate such a process is a very welcoming one, and it is the hope that civil society will show interest in this process, academia and think tanks, and to engage the necessary actors to make their critical inputs in order to nip the declining democratic values within the region in the bud. The responsibility to promote and protect democratic values in member states, and by extension, in the West Africa region, goes beyond the individual member states and the regional institutions, although certainly they have an important role to play. The citizenry and civil society organizations equally play a great role in ensuring that the West African region gets the kind of democracy that the citizens aspire for. It is in this regard that I see this seminar as an opportunity for all of us to reinvigorate our energies and advocacies within the framework of putting pressure on our governments and institutions, including regional bodies, to ensure that we consolidate our burgeoning democracies in order that member states in the region will leap into the club of nations identified as full democracies. In this regard, I should also say that we very much welcome similar exercises as you are engaged in that are being undertaken by, for instance, the WANEP, the West African Network for Peace Building, the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, which in collaboration with the Kofi Annan Foundation will be holding similar think tanks, workshops, reflections on the future of democracy in West Africa and what can be done to consolidate. Well, of course, first to arrest the decline and then to consolidate the fragile democracies in the sub-region. I wish you successful deliberations, and please share with the ECOWAS Commission the outcome of your webinar, as it is in the process of reviewing and revising the relevant protocols of the sub-regional organization in order to strengthen peace and democratic governance in West Africa. I thank you for your attention.
We greatly appreciate that heartfelt message from His Excellency Mohammed Ibn Chambers, who couldn't be here because he's actually in the process of trying to advance democracy and democratic governance in the West Africa region. So we appreciate that message. Now, we do also have with us the Honorable Dr. Mohamed Julde Jallow, Vice President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and he will be offering his remarks momentarily. A point of housekeeping before he begins: if you have questions, please submit them through the Q&A function of the Zoom platform. You can do so at any point during this session. Do not wait till the Q&A session, and we will get to your questions. So feel free to start populating the Q&A function. Your Excellency, over to you. We're absolutely honored to have you, and we're delighted and look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar on a very, very important topic, of which I will just want to share some of my experiences with you, being a student leader and then somebody who had the opportunity to work for several international organizations, including the United Nations, the International Crisis Group, and civil society organizations. And today, I am now sitting as Vice President and to share a little bit of my perspective with you. First of all, I will start to say that if you want to understand the role of regional bodies to support democratic consolidation or to reverse democratic decline, we need, particularly when it comes to ECOWAS and the AU, we need to have a deeper insight into how these bodies were modeled. I will start first by stating that democracy, the kind of democracy we are talking about here today, which is essentially multi-party democracy, started in what is being referred to as the third wave of democratization, started in the 1990s. It came as a model, essentially to redress the state. Because other countries in the 90s and in the 80s that we are not doing bad economically never used democracy as a model to redress the state. That is why they call them the Asian tigers. They didn't do elections. They are not into multi-party. But because their state we are doing very well economically and socially, there was no need to redress the Asian tigers. So this model of redressing the state in Sierra Leone, in Africa, because we believe that the state has failed, we talk about state collapse, we talk about what they call the statelessness. Statelessness meaning the gradual process by which a state loses out its capability to even deliver basic services. So Western institutions, Western scholars, African scholars thought that the only way to reverse that statelessness, which is to get into a process of stateness, to build the capability of the state to deliver services, we have to use democracy as a model to redress the state. So that is how the third wave started. So when it started, the idea is that to make the state functional so that the state is capable of delivering essential services like education, like security, so that citizens can go to sleep, schools can function, civil service workers can be paid. There is a very functional public service. These are the ideas why the push for the return to democratic rule. So we started with multi-party politics. And the multi-party politics came in with new institutions and new thinking processes. Why I'm making this point is because all these processes that we are taking place, the very African Union and ECOWAS was never modeled to accompany those processes. New institutions were built, like for example, you have now in countries what you call the Independent National Electoral Commission or the National Electoral Commission, the rise of civil society organizations, human rights, women's group, all putting pressure on the state for the state to be democratic, for the state to be redressed. Then you have the judiciary, you have institutions like human rights commissions were established. You have the police. We begin to focus on the human rights abuses of the police, to reform the entire state, including the public sector. So which means you had a process of the reform of the state, but you never had a comprehensive process of the reform of regional bodies. Because if you take, for example, Chambers, that was in ECOWAS for nearly maybe 10 years, I don't know. I would have loved to see him here to tell us during that period of the democratization, was ECOWAS adapting to the process of stateness. So what happened is that most African countries began to organize elections, but these institutions, regional institutions, we are not going at the same pace that the African state was going on. We are not going at the same pace. So make no mistake, that is why the African state was far ahead in terms of building institutions, in terms of being democratic, in terms of being transparent, more transparent than the regional bodies, more accountable than even the regional bodies. So the regional bodies could not build a democratic value system. So how can they be able, they are limited to what? To just election observation. So you have ECOWAS election observation. They come to observe a bad election, a failed election, and they say it is free and fair. The AU comes to observe a bad election, and they say it's still free and fair. So you have even these very regional institutions endorsing bad, flawed elections. How can you? Everybody know, you go to some country, you know the elections is so flawed. I've been observers in several countries. You will know that at the end of the day, the election, the ECOWAS come and write a verified report and praise all of these processes. So it means that while these states were making effort to be democratic, these regional bodies never build the architecture necessary to make them adaptable to the change, to the time. That is a democratic time, a democratic spirit. So you have states that are doing very well, that are far above the democratic thinking process of this institution. So it makes it very difficult for them to arrest the decline. Because if somebody does not understand what is declining, how can you arrest it? Because if an regional institutions go to an African country, you oversee a flawed elections, and you say the elections are free and fair, it means you have not even understood what is democracy. So how can you participate? So maybe you can say even the very regional institutions have become elements of declining democracy in Africa, because if they are going on, because they changed the constitution, we see democratic multi-party constitution being changed. They didn't do anything. They were shooting people in the streets of Conakry. Nobody did anything. Everybody knew it was bad. Even I had to be putting pressure. The Excellency Chambers know how much pressure I put on him when he was at the West Africa SRSG about Guinea. ECOWAS was not doing. So it's very difficult. The point I am making here is that if the regional institutions over time have not built the capability, the architecture to support democracy building and democracy consolidation, they will not be able to arrest a decline. Because one, they don't even understand what is decline. Because if you know that your elections that are flawed, we say, as far as we are concerned, the elections are free and fair. How can you say the elections in Guinea-Conakry that recently took place are free and fair? ECOWAS was there, and they pulled a report. Then it shows that these institutions have not been able to develop the value systems, the architecture that is needed to support West African countries to deepen their democracy. That is the first point I want to make. So the second point is that I am happy that you are raising this thing. So today, what we need to think is that does decline means these regional institutions, we need to rethink their model. We need to rethink the role of regional bodies, now how to model them. So instead of these regional bodies helping decline, to arrest decline, is how do we rethink this regional body so that at least at this period where we are, when the red flags are going up, when coup d'etats are coming back to West Africa, when presidents are just changing constitution, looking at leading opposition parties and telling them they cannot participate in an election, and then these regional bodies don't have a very effective sanction regime apart from just making declarations that is very even difficult to implement. So the question today is that this is the time to rethink the model, to rethink how to reshape this regional institution so that they can become elements, engines to strengthen democracy. Because in the word decline, I had problem with it when I saw it. I said, because when you talk about decline, you must have reached at a particular stage and then you start to decline. I think democratic reversal is better used. It's just like when you start a vehicle, like you are driving and you stop in the middle of the road and start to reverse. So now you more or less is democratic reversal. So what I'm saying essentially is that today, when you look at those countries in Africa that are doing well in terms of multi-party, Sierra Leone, here we have had 3 elections. We have changed regimes 3 times. We had the SLPP, they lost to an opposition, the government came and lost to an opposition, but yet still, what is happening? Not only in Sierra Leone. One, there is a very slow process of institutionalization, meaning that the very fundamental institutions that are supposed to safeguard democratic deepening, like the judiciary, like civil society, like the police, like the state, there's very slow process of institutionalization. And this process is far removed from regional bodies. I don't think ECOWAS knows the capability of my public sector. I don't know whether ECOWAS knows that whether I am capable of delivering services as a state. They don't even know the extent to which my judiciary is capable. They don't even have an indicator to measure whether my judiciary is democratic or is not democratic. I don't think they know it. Unless if they know that things that I don't know. Slow process of institutionalization. Second is there is a progressive contraction of the civic space. Make no mistake, from Johannesburg to Freetown, from Freetown to Nairobi, the contraction of civic space. Because the euphoria of the 1990s, where international institutions like World Bank, like the IMF, like the European Union are investing in democratization, they are no longer investing in democratization. What they are investing now today is gender empowerment, gender equality, the soft things. They go in, they fail to realize. I told them that if you do, I normally tell the EU and others, open society, everybody, I say if you don't continue to invest in deepening democracy, you believe that we have done sufficiently well, that you are not supporting the evolution of a vibrant civic space, there will be democratic reversals in this part of the continent. I give you an example. Today, civil society organizations, NGOs are closing up because international organizations can no longer support them to cover overhead costs. They just say programmatic costs. So what you have a contraction of the space. Make no mistake, nobody wants to leave power. Even in the most advanced democracy, we see how big guys are fighting not to leave the presidency. So you will not talk about Africa. So if you don't support a vibrant and viable civic space, if the civic space is contracting, believe you me, this is what most African heads of state want to hear, that there are no longer independent voices to cry them down. That is a serious problem. And that is what affected most of these countries where there are constitutional changes. Civil society, civic spaces were contracted. They don't have time to be very vibrant. They are not doing very well. So the president, the heads of state thought that they could use that space. So that is one. The other thing, the most important thing I am seeing today, which has come out very vividly by COVID, the impact of COVID-19, is what I call regime legitimization. You have legitimization and delegitimization processes. What is regime legitimization? Is that every regime has to survive. You are voted into office to deliver essential services. If you don't have the economy, if the economy is not in your favor, if you are not doing well economically, you can no longer support essential services like security, to have a viable, functional police force, to have a defense architecture. You have hospitals that are working. The education sector is working. Believe you me, these are the key elements that help the regime to increase the legitimization, the legitimacy of a regime. When the economy is going bad and governments are losing out in getting resources to deliver these services, the alternative is what? This regime, they become repressive. Because when you have civil society who go out there and tell them, you can no longer deliver security. The police is corrupt. The judiciary is corrupt. They go after these people. So regime legitimacy is under serious threat in Africa. And there's no better time to understand that than COVID-19. Because what COVID-19 has caused in a country like Sierra Leone, for example, it has impacted a small economy like Sierra Leone. About $2 billion combined public, private In government alone, in 2010, we have lost hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. These were revenue that we used to support healthcare system, healthcare delivery, education. They are no longer there. And then you have big institutions, you understand? And then all of these African countries, they have been boxed into what? They have been boxed into what we call debt corner. So that today you cannot even borrow money if your hospitals are breaking down. Because the IMF will say, no, Sierra Leone, you cannot borrow again. You have closed down on your borrowing. The World Bank says you cannot borrow. And what is happening post-COVID recovery, you have more statelessness. Make no mistake, more statelessness, more and more states. When we move out of COVID, we'll begin to lose the capability to even deliver services. So statelessness is going to increase. And when you have increased statelessness, it means decrease democratic credentials. It means decrease legitimization. So for now, this is where I'm going to tell, this is what I'm going to stop. I just share with you some of these things. But more importantly, this is an opportunity when you look at what is happening in West Africa to rethink regional bodies. Are they modeled enough to be able to address a decline? I don't think so. What do we need to do to get them to that space? Recently, in Accra or where, you know, ECOWAS will come out with a communique, and then people will fight over the communique. Hey, don't put this word with anger or head of state. Don't put this one. So it means that institution is not remodeled for that. So it cannot play any role in arresting a decline. You understand? Because if you tell somebody that you are going to give the person a parachute to jump from an helicopter, it should be a parachute that will help him not to get damaged. But if you give him the wrong parachute, there is no way that person will be able to survive. So these institutions were not modeled for that. But what is happening now makes us enable us to rethink this institution, to adapt them so that they can be able to play a vital role in the democratization process. Why? Because we have realized in Africa, democracy is the only model that enables us to redress the state, to build the kind of stateless capability that we need to deliver services. So that is where I will stop for now. I'm still around for any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Vice President Jallow, for searing indictment of regional bodies and their contribution to catalyzing democratic reversal and decline, as opposed to the contrary. We will have an opportunity to kind of expound on some of the points, strong points that you made in your presentation and remarks. I'll pass on to my distinguished colleague, Professor Kate Baldwin, to offer a little bit of perspective, maybe zooming out a bit, to share some context on kind of global democratic decline and how kind of the region fits into that picture. So Kate, any thoughts or insights on what you've seen trending?
Thank you so much. So it's a real honor to build on some of the points that were referenced by His Excellency, the Vice President. So I do think, like, zooming out, there are a number of points that he made that I wanted to just provide a little bit more data on. And so maybe I will share my screen here. And so, as was just discussed, you know, the motivation for this webinar is the idea that we are possibly experiencing a moment of democratic reversal, at least, possibly democratic decline in West Africa. And, you know, if we look thinking about trends across sub-Saharan Africa in general, since independence period, and which really marked early 1960s is the period we typically begin with, we can see that, you know, for the first few decades, there was not very much democracy in across sub-Saharan Africa, and coups were very common. Here I'm using a data measure that's slightly different from the one that was presented by our first keynote speaker. This is from the Varieties of Democracy Index, which is collected at the University of Göteborg, but generally their measure of democracy is on a scale of 0 to 1. And they consider things like whether elections are free or fair, whether the officials who are making decisions are chosen through these elections, whether there's freedom to express your views and to form political parties, and of course, whether there's close to universal suffrage. And so here you can see that, 1990, which is often used to mark the beginning of the third wave of democracy in sub-Saharan Africa, we see a dramatic increase in the average quality of democracy across countries on the continent. And simultaneously, we see, especially after 2000, a drop off in the number of coups d'etats, but that has really, in the past 2 years, we are maybe seeing that trend reversing. Now, if we are to compare West Africa to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, we actually see trends that are even more pronounced. So actually, West Africa experienced more movement towards democracy after 1990 than other regions of sub-Saharan Africa. So the gains in democracy were particularly great there. And so while other regions tended to see an increase up to 2000, they sort of leveled off after that. Well, we can continue to see gains being made in West Africa really up until the last 2 years or so. And so, in this sense, West Africa, one thing as political scientists, we like to think about the structural determinants of democracy. And as His Excellency the Vice President noted, democracy tends to be easier when you have more economic development and more state legitimacy. And so if you're to think about the average GDP per capita of countries around the world, West Africa, for the past 2 decades has actually been doing extraordinarily well in its level of democracy compared to its level of economic development. If we think about, if we think about the threats to democracy, I tend to think of them as sort of 2 categories. One are things that are really clear constitutional violations, such as coups d'etats or a president losing the election and failing to step down. But there are a second kind as well. And the second kind of violations are smaller changes to the Constitution, such as term limits. So changing the Constitution to allow a president to run for a term that would not have been constitutionally legal had the change not been made. Other kinds of issues are throwing opposition candidates in jail. Sometimes, these are often on corruption charges, right? So is that legal or illegal? But certainly it reduces the civic space and it reduces the possibility for political opposition to form. So both sorts of things are a threat to democracy, but if we consider only coups d'etats for the moment, we can see that West Africa in general has tended to have more of them across its history compared to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Coups d'etats continued with more frequency really up to the last decade compared to elsewhere in the region where their tendency dropped off earlier. But in the past 2 years, we've seen an increase in coups d'etats in West Africa. That maybe we're also seeing recent coups in Sudan and Chad, so that this is something that might be happening elsewhere as well. So anyway, I wanted to just provide a little bit of broader context and to say, I really agree with the Vice President's remarks that regional organizations are probably, it's hard for them to deal with issues of democracy in general, but for issues like coups d'etats, cases where presidents fail to step down after elections, we have seen there's some positive action and they have maybe more tools at their disposal. So the case of the contested election in Gambia in recent years being one example. But these issues of sort of more gradual backsliding where constitutions are changed to allow for 3rd term limits, where the freedom of the press is really suppressed, where opposition leaders are put in jail on charges that may or may not be valid. These are, I think, really important issues for regional bodies to think about as well, and are, I think, even more difficult to be able to have the local information on local institutions. And there I really see there has to be a very strong collaboration between local civil society, voters, and they're going to have to play a very important role in monitoring and expressing their displeasure for those types of actions. With, I think, regional bodies are ultimately can only really provide a supporting role in making sure we don't see that kind of backsliding.
Thank you very much, Kate, for kind of sharing some data and analysis of kind of the trend lines of democratization in the region, and also some of the challenges that we see emerging in the data, number of coups and kind of some of the decline that we see happening, echoing what the Vice President just mentioned. So thank you for that. And I think you also mentioned kind of civil society, and we're very fortunate to have some very active, engaged, thoughtful, and people who are not shy about speaking truth to power on this panel, in the name of Idayat Hassan and Udo Ilo. So first, I'll start with Idayat. And Idayat, as some of you may know, is the director for the Center for Democracy and Development in West Africa. So Idayat, could you please tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the role or the function or dysfunction of regional bodies in advancing democracy in the region, but also bring in some of your perspective from kind of the civil society standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie, and thank you, His Excellency, who has shown that he's still a civil society person with a lot of energy and openness in speaking. I think first and foremost, it's important to note that I'm going to start on a positive note. In West Africa, we are still doing good. Democracy is not a given, it has to be nurtured, and we continue to nurture it. And it's actually important to put it out there that until last year, all the 15 ECOWAS countries were democracy. And these are democracies where we have actually seen alternation of powers between parties. The Vice President of Sierra Leone, actually, they were able to unseat the ruling APC government in Sierra Leone. In Nigeria and Ghana, we've also seen incumbents removed from office in elections. I think these are important positives, considering that even the third wave of democratization in Africa started from Benin, here in West Africa. Even if Benin, that used to be one of the 4 countries classified as open, is now partly free on the Freedom House Index. Yes, in spite of these challenges, I think the challenges are monumental, especially when you go back and look at the Freedom House Index, both in 2020 and in 2021, which actually identify 5 of West African countries as being part of the 12 countries that have declined in democracy in the last 2 years. I think that is indicative. But be that as it may, and all the positive, it's still a mixed bag. And what are the challenges? First, I want to start with ECOWAS, understanding ECOWAS and how it operates. Yes, the Vice President really spoke about ECOWAS. There are 3 units: the executive, the legislature, and of course, the judiciary. The executive or the Council of the Head of States, the authority itself, and within that, they have the ECOWAS Commission. What is important to note in the decline compared to the Chambers period is the fact that this caliber of leaders are not the same. The strong voices of Obasanjo, Abdoulaye Wade, who even attempted the 3rd term, and who could actually sweep erring colleagues to power, speak truth to power itself, is no longer applicable. The decline in leadership has actually contributed immensely to the erosion of ECOWAS. And even the same is applicable at the Commission. The kind of leadership also of the likes of Chambers, subsequent leaders, with each passing year, every 4 years, there is a change. There has been consistent decline in terms of the Commission itself's capacity and ability to engage. But some of this decline is not just capacity, it's also leadership, because you need strong leadership who would actually be able to put their foot down and ensure that the right thing is done. The example of Guinea was actually given, and when the voters register was faulty in Guinea, of course, ECOWAS spoke out. The same with Guinea-Bissau with the contested elections, But before you could say Jack Robinson, the president, so-called, he was not yet, he swore himself in as president, then made a visit from Senegal, moved to the head of state, the president of the chairman of the Council of Head of State in Niger. From there, moved to Nigeria, and he was formally recognized as the president, legitimate president of Guinea-Bissau. What could the commission have done in such an instance? Then you also have the ECOWAS parliament to make laws, of course, or to sit and look at issues. But these parliamentarians are not chosen the way the EU actually chooses its own parliamentarian, nor do they have so much power to impact. And the court system is being the most useful when it comes to ECOWAS itself. The ECOWAS court has been very progressive. It has given lots of beautiful judgments, and it has been the last resort of most of us in the region. But the problem is who implements the decision from this ECOWAS court. So talking about the body and the challenges, it's not able to do as much as it can, except there is leadership, capacity, funding. There are lots of things that challenges ECOWAS, and there is a need for them to look at the EU system and see what they can actually adapt that can make it to be strengthened and stronger. For me, I've actually been speaking a lot about these issues, and I think today I really want to zero in on what we should actually be doing. One of the things that have led to the erosion of democracy in the region has been contested elections itself. So the coup d'etat in Mali and in Guinea-Conakry were all linked to faulty elections, as well as attempts to actually change totemism itself, to change the constitution. And this is something that ECOWAS do also have a fault. And at this point in time, we are trying to review the ECOWAS Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, such that it's able to put in its term limits of 2 terms, as well as important provisions that comes to talking about changing the rules on elections, because the provision is basically that if there is an agreement amongst all the contesting parties, you can actually change the rules, maybe even 6 months into the elections. This is not good enough because this has been abused, and of course the need for them to proactively engage, but the protocol itself is very key and important. But when it comes to the elections, observation is key. We can't continue to write, but there is a need to strengthen the electoral management body themselves, and the independence in the appointment of these bodies are quite key to this, to addressing the issues of elections in the region beyond having peace parts. The appointment process and the capacity between the Anglophone and the Francophone are completely different. So the issues of voters register are a recurring decimal when it comes to integrity of this register, a recurring decimal in West Africa, or even the ability of the EMBs to properly conduct elections. I think civil society is also a very important issue here in the region. The strong voices that used to be there are no longer there. The activists, cum scholars, who were able to do both the intellectual work and also be on the streets to fight, to define their agenda, are fast declining. And I think that if care is not taken in the next couple of years to build a new set of strategic leaders in the region, we might be challenged. And I think thirdly is the judiciary itself. The region has actually lived more, most of the countries are more a rule of law, rule by law as against rule of law, if not all the countries, because somehow the capacity of the judiciary has been completely decimated. The checks and balances are missing. How do we strengthen the judiciary as a very important, strong arm of government that is able to hold the executive and the legislative arm of bodies accountable, such that rule of law can actually be a norm are not the exception in this thing. And I think the last issue to also bring about, and that's my last point, is there is a need for leadership, global leadership, multilateralism itself. The role of China, Russia, and other illiberal regimes here in West Africa is far pronounced, more than we tend to talk about it. And the role of Western powers are fast dwindling with each passing week, with each passing month, and there is a lot that needs to be done. And I think that for me and most of my colleagues, we are looking up to what will be happening during the conference on democracy being organized by the US President Biden in December, to see what will actually be on the table and how the US itself is also going to address our democracy are very important factors that will determine how much democratic progression or decline in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Idayat Hassan, for your really thoughtful, thought-provoking remarks and pointing out some of the key areas, whether it's institutional and structural reform and capacity building for the regional bodies, the importance of rule of law, and the primacy of effective leadership in addressing some of the challenges that are fostering democratic decline or regression. So I'll hand over now to our very own Yale World Fellow, but also head of Nigeria Office of Open Society Foundation, Udo Ilo, the principal person who is responsible for this convening today. So Udo, you've heard a lot of different things and statements and strong messaging on the challenges and some of the opportunities. What's your perspective from a civil society standpoint?
Thank you, Eddie. And again, let me join my voice in thanking His Excellency Jude Ejalo for a very thought-provoking contribution. And I mean, I could confidently say that everything that needs to be said has been said. Idayat touched all the very important issues, but I want to put three things on the table. A colleague of mine recently wrote an article in Africa Arguments, Matthias Honkbe, where he said that the regional bodies are more interested in coup d'etat than in the elements that creates the environment for coup d'etat. And I think that framing adequately captures what we're dealing with here, that consistently the regional bodies miss the signals that something is going bad. And the inadequacy of the configuration of the regional body makes it oftentimes impossible for them to intervene at a time when the problem can and should have been solved. So if you take the Guinea situation, for instance, when the crisis of the credibility of the voter register started, when the crisis around the amendments of the constitution to give the president the opportunity to run for a third term started, and when it became obvious that the Constitutional Court was willing and happy to do whatever the president asked them to do, that was the time where the intervention should have happened in a much more aggressive way. Because one of the points I've been making, and I'm also pushing in this conversation, is that when there is a defective constitutional process that allows an incumbent to gain advantage and stay in power, which he would not ordinarily have done, but for that defective constitutional process, the regional body should treat that as an unconstitutional takeover of power. Because the Constitution is the fundamental document that guides how governments and democracy operates around the region. If an incumbent decides to illegally tinker with that process to keep himself in power, that is an unconstitutional takeover of power. And it's within the framework of the African Charter on Democracy, where it was very clear that Africa would not condone unconstitutional takeover of power. But what has happened over the years is that because the presidents, the incumbents, have a total control of the legislature and the judiciary. They start off this fraudulent process and legitimize it with a subservient legislative arm of government and a pliable judiciary. But it is clear on the substance of it that this process is wrong. And so if we begin to rethink the way we understand coup d'etat and the way we call out people who are guilty of it, or call out people who have unconstitutionally taken over power, and begin to apply it to all of these processes of third termism that we've seen now in places like Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, and all these other countries within the region, then it might be a way of having a comprehensive and a cohesive understanding of what is applicable, what is acceptable, and what is not. The second point I will put on the table is the issue of global solidarity. Idayat referenced it in her intervention. But the truth of the matter is that increasingly, democratic forces in country are finding less and less support from across the globe, from outside of their countries. In Benin Republic, when their current president decided to engineer a rather destructive process that allowed him to have a near total control of the National Assembly in his country, and more or less ran as the only viable candidate in the presidential election. People in Benin Republic made noise about this thing, but it didn't catch. It was just a domestic problem. There was no support, there was no solidarity. And that country, which was one of the shining examples of democratic credentials in the region, is now, in my view, authoritarian. And it happened in our very eyes. When people in country were shouting and making effort, there was no support globally. There was no support within the region. And that also speaks to the point His Excellency made about civil society groups and the kind of support they are getting. It is not just about civil society groups in one country. It has to be a solidarity and an army of democratic progressives across the region, banding together, coming together like we saw in the 90s, to support each other in countries, elevate issues and amplify voices where authoritarian regimes are trying to take hold. The final point I want to put on the table is that this conspiracy of silence amongst African leaders when things go wrong because of this inexplicable fidelity to a dysfunctional brotherhood is something that we have to call out. And so one example is the election that happened in Uganda. We all watched it and saw the way the incumbent president manipulated the process, made it near difficult for the opposition to do anything. And won, of course, a contested election, an illegitimate election. Presidents from across the continent, including my own country, flew to that inauguration. And what they do by this action is to give credibility to a process that was obviously undemocratic. And we have to find a way of exposing, calling out, and condemning such action, that this after the fact endorsement of a defective democratic process is one of the reasons why there is incentive for incumbents to misbehave. And the other point that rises from this is that when people in country do not see any legitimate or legal means of addressing this level of authoritarianism or imposition in their countries, coup d'etat happen, insurgency happen, secessions happen. And this is how we continue to destabilize the region. And so there is a duty, therefore, some level of a duty of care on the part of African leaders, not to by the actions make it seem normal for presidents to alter democratic process to their own advantage in a way that actually undermines the spirit of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Udo, for kind of summarizing and crystallizing some of the key areas where you see there structural deficits and challenges. And I think you also reiterate that important point around the global solidarity, regional solidarity that has to be a key element disrupt these conspiracies of silence that perpetuate and enable these environments where democratic regression can happen. It would be great, Your Excellency, Vice President, if you have some thoughts or reflections on what has been said, or what you think could be opportunities for transformation. Maybe I'll leave if you have some ideas in terms of how do we, is there a mechanism for reforming the regional institutions? Because as people say about the United Nations, it's not an independent body unto itself. It's a constituency of states. ECOWAS is a constituency of states. And so are there ways that it can be reformed to be more effective? And within countries, are there mechanisms that you see as more viable in trying to strengthen and stop this regression?
No, thank you very much, Professor. I think already what happened in Guinea and in Mali sent a very severe shock waves, not only in West Africa, but across the continent. So I believe today there have been a lot of this discourse within these regional organizations on what can we do more to avoid this kind of trends. I think, make no mistake, even the last heads of state meeting, the second to last head of state meeting in Accra, like somebody just mentioned, that in the supplementary protocol, ECOWAS wants to include some of these things in the supplementary protocol, means that is why I said in my opening statement that what is happening now has created space for us to rethink the model. There is now that consciousness. There is now that awareness that the countries like Guinea, if ECOWAS or the African Union would have intervened earlier, they would have been able to make a better impact in trying to halt the democratic decline and then get the democratic process back on track, or get the state back on track to be able to move towards free and fair elections rather than a very skewed elections. Today, there is that consciousness, I must say. I cannot say everything here, but there have been discussions among heads of state about that. And I believe that moving forward, these are some of the issues that will be put on the table for the Commission to understand the dynamics. And when you look at ECOWAS, the institutions that we are very, very familiar with, and the criticism that we are all part of this institution, for the fact that today we are criticizing the fact that they go and observe flawed elections and they give those elections passing mark. I think that has brought a very new consciousness within the institution. The first is the consciousness that is now emerging. The second aspect is how to rekindle what Udo called, a sense of solidarity. Before, you had a civil society coalition office in ECOWAS. But when you go to ECOWAS, when you ask them, where is the civil society office in ECOWAS? It's one small room in one corner of ECOWAS like this that does not even befit a room of somebody of a P2. It shows the level to which ECOWAS even treats civil society. There is this ECOWAS Civil Society, ECOWAS Forum, I don't know how it is called. There was this, I remember one time I went workshop. I went to Senegal. That time I was working for the United Nations office in Dakar. I went to Abuja. I was looking there. It was headed by a professor from Senegal. I was looking for the office. They went and showed me one small office in one corner like this. Symbolically shows the respect which even ECOWAS gives to civil society. A whole umbrella organization that brings all West Africa civil society together. They went and, so there is need for us and for our colleagues in the civil society to begin to take that space to engage ECOWAS so that we can start a two level of building that solidarity. A top-bottom approach wherein ECOWAS is going to make that a very serious enterprise, because what ECOWAS can also do is to hide behind those civil society organizations so that they can be informed. Because I remember during the democratic experiment here, I was at the university, because newspapers in Freetown could not write about the return to multi-party rule. When we were in university, we used to write interesting article about the return to multi-party rule. So the newspapers down Freetown will go to university and collect the articles we are writing and publish them in their newspapers. This is what the students are writing. So ECOWAS could also hide behind these civil society organizations, that can be able to help them further legitimize their project. That look, we have consulted with civil society in your country, and this is the position of civil society. And so they can hide behind the position of civil society to be able to send a very strong message to individual ECOWAS member states. So ECOWAS can, from top to bottom, able to rekindle that sense of solidarity, bring civil society together so that they can act as one voice, so that the West Africa Civil Society Forum they have can be expanded and additional resources can be put into that. Also, there's another aspect to it. Another approach is bottom-top approach. How does this civil society able to build solidarity? Believe you me, in the 1990s, the late 1990s, in the Mano River Union, you had a very, very powerful West Africa civil society network, women's network. In Guinea, when I used to come here in 2003, 2002 to work for civil society organization, I used to go to Monrovia, I used to go to Guinea. We used to have a very high sense of networking and solidarity. We were able to mobilize women. Up to now, you have this Mano River Union Peace Women's Network that was very powerful. They can cripple a whole state. But all that is gone now. When I came back, I went to Liberia. I started asking, where are these people? No, this one has gone, this one, they are no longer. So we also, civil society has to take it as a project so that to rekindle that solidarity from below. And the other aspect is that somebody made mentions of international institutions, that there is going to be a democracy conference in America in December. I was telling somebody in Guinea, a civil society person, I said, one of the biggest sanctions that Western countries and Western institutions can give to African government, when you change a constitution, you close the consular office of the European Union and America in a country, the citizen will rise up against that regime. Because imagine if you close this consular section of the EU and the American embassy in a place like Sierra Leone or like Ghana or Nigeria, all Nigerians and Ghanaians know that nobody will go to Europe or to America because one man has changed the constitution. Believe you me, that man will leave that country that night. These are some of the practical, pragmatic sanctions that these institutions can bring to some of this regime. The sanction regime is very, very weak. Excellency Chambers was talking about sanction regime. The sanction regime is very, very weak. Because if you say you are going to sanction poor military officers in Guinea, we are sanctioning you, we are going to put an embargo. Embargo on somebody that does not even have a visa card, does even have an account. That embargo is not going to make any difference. These are the guys that have taken power today in Guinea and Mali. I think whether they have ever had opportunity to go overseas other than just go to these military schools in France and get a training. And the current guy that is in Guinea has never gone to the United States of America. You understand? So when you talk about sanction regime, you have to look at the kind of sanction regime. The sanction regime is a sanction regime that can enable popular people to rise against their leadership. It's not only sanction regime that is targeted to few guys that are struggling to cope. And sometimes, what is the saying today in Guinea? In Guinea, when ECOWAS sent a mission there, they were bold throughout. People were standing in the streets saying, when the former president was changing the constitution, You never sent here a mission to come and tell him to stop changing the constitution. Now that we have gallant bravery guys that have removed that man, you are coming to tell us now this is how to go. So you see, what does that tell you? It tells you that the regime, the sanction regime, should be reviewed. What kind of additional sanction regime? Then secondly, how do we engage those international financial institutions? My experience sitting here as a vice president, I told you what are the factors that are contracting the civic space. What are the factors that are leading to democratic decline? Why are people losing confidence in elections? Why are citizens no longer interested in going to register and to vote and to sit down there to ensure that their votes are counted? Why people are giving popular acclaim to coup d'etat? Is because there is a process, a gradual, slow motion process of delegitimization. What does that mean? Is that regime don't have resources to deliver services. Regime don't have resources, you understand, regime don't have resources to support the aspirations that came. Before, when I was starting my statement, I told you that democracy was seen as a model to redress the state, meaning that to make the state acquire the capability to deliver services. If that same state does not have that capability, if there is a progressive decline in the power authority of that state to deliver services, that state is going to be contested by its own people. So what you have today, there's what I call a de facto sanction regime. Countries who want to build hospitals, they cannot borrow money, because today if you want to build a normal 150 bed hospital, if you take it per bed, today what is the cost of a single bed? They will tell you that today is $450,000 per bed. You multiply that by 150 bed hospital, that's a lot of money. If you want to go and borrow it, the IMF and the World Bank will say, no, you don't have a window to borrow any longer. Your debt ceiling is closed. So you sit down and you cannot provide the services that is needed by the people. And then the people say, you cannot deliver healthcare. So this democratic aspiration has to also come in the improvement of the capacity of the African state to deliver services, because the democratic model was meant to redress the African state. The democratic model was meant to help African state build institutions that are not only going to oversee the rule of law, oversee a functional police, a police force, a judiciary. My sister was talking about the judiciary. Believe you me, the judiciary in most African countries today are under-resourced. That is why today, if you are looking for lawyers to go and work for government, so that to be government lawyers, to work in the law officer, they prefer to go to private practice, because private practice gives them more money. So you have an entire Ministry of Justice with very limited lawyers, with lack of experience. You just come there like an internship. After 1 year, they go to private practice because the state can no longer pay them. So the judiciary is not competitive. It's not competitive in the sense that today, if you look at the conditions of service of some of these judges, they prefer to go. The lawyers want to go. All of this requires resources. Nobody has ever asked the question, does democracy is like I used to tell people. I presented a paper a couple of years ago at the Center for the Conference of Center for African Studies when I was at the University of Bordeaux in London, and I told them professionalism in the security forces comes with a price. You cannot ask a military to be professional if you are paying a whole lieutenant $250. If you want a military man to be professional, you have to come with professionalism comes with a price. An independent and functional judiciary comes with a price. A professional police force comes with a price. All of these are resources that are lacking in most African countries today. They cannot cope. They cannot cope. The police is under-resourced. Somebody was telling, we organized an election here, a by-election, and there was violence. The next by-election, I decided to deploy the army there, so that at least then 2 ambassadors came, a European Union ambassador and a British High Commissioner. They said that is not the role of the army to police election. Then I told them, Mr. Ambassador, the last election, because we have very limited security officers, you came to me and told me the election was violent. Now I've deployed military and there was no violence. Instead of praising me that at least I've reduced violence in the electoral process, he said that is not the role of the army. Then I told them, when I was in Kosovo, I saw the British army serving sandwich and coffee. Is that the role of the army, to serve sandwich and coffee in Kosovo? So these are some of the things we are struggling with, that when you don't have, the state does not have the capacity to strengthen institutions that is capable of saying. Talk about the judiciary. I can tell you, just do an audit of the judiciary across West Africa. You realize there will not going to be any good story. The same judiciary.
We, in the interest of time, we do appreciate how strongly you feel about this question. In fact, you raise kind of the critical problem that's created, the de facto sanctions that you note that are creating and constraining the ability to deliver to the people in ways that are meaningful and can contribute to legitimizing democracy. In the interest of time, we do have a few questions that have come in. One on the question of sovereignty and how does sovereignty come into play in the region. And so as you think about just your reflections and closing remarks, I'll have everyone's going to give a minute or two remarks on their reflections and how we might move forward. We also have a question centered around the balance between foreign institutions imposing sanctions and international solidarity. Are we calling for foreign control of African governments? So, also kind of centered around this question of state sovereignty and the role. How do you define solidarity in the international space? And so I'll hand over to Idayat Hassan to just offer some closing reflections on where you think we have opportunity for progress and any comments that you'd like to offer. And then I'll hand over to Kate and then Udo.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I think what we've learned from the coup d'etat in Mali and in Guinea is that elections are quite important, but most importantly is the need for democracy to actually deliver development to the people. People need to feel democracy, not just from voting, but how it actually reflects in their lives. In the last couple of years, our poverty continues to rise in the region. Like most of the poorest countries on earth are right there, Guinea, Niger, on all forms of human development indexes. Some of these countries rank very low. So we have to ensure that democracy delivers development to the people such that the people will be the one to fight for democracy. In a system where people are no longer interested in democracy, where the thirst for democracy, the yearning is no longer there. But you see our own citizens, colleagues of myself, writing in Washington Post, talking about the coupists staying for 3 years or forever to do all the necessary things, or citizens trooping to the streets to welcome coup d'etat, as we saw in Mali. But in Guinea, everybody actually welcomed it. In Mali, there were just few dissenters, but in Guinea, it was completely welcome. It tells us that we are actually in a problem. We have to make democracy work for the people such that they would be the one pushing, upholding democracy itself. Then 2 is the issue of solidarity. Solidarity is actually key. Solidarity within the region and solidarity internationally. Solidarity does not mean that we are foreclosing our sovereignty. All the countries are sovereign and they often pledge sovereignty. That is why one of the reasons ECOWAS at times could be a toothless bulldog, because whatever is in the protocol is subjected to the country's constitution itself. So that is built in, but we need to build solidarity. Solidarity to fight and nurture democracy, as well as making democracy itself to deliver to the people such that the people will fight to uphold the democracy itself. Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you very much, Idayat. I'll hand over to Kate. Any comments or reflections? And then one last question that came in, if someone wants to touch on it, is on kind of the monopoly of state violence being ceded to non-state actors who are taking civilians hostage, jeopardizing people's right to their own property and life and well-being. So, how to deal with these challenges of insecurity within the state when the state abrogates its responsibility in that way. But Kate, over to you.
So I think I'll just add that with others, I think that ultimately the best protector of democracy is the citizens of its own country and strong political institutions at the domestic level. Despite the title of this panel, I actually remain rather optimistic about the prospects for democracy in West Africa. It is a struggle. The resource constraint is real. But on the other hand, as I think my fellow panelists have all demonstrated, there are many political leaders and civil society activists that are deeply committed to the project. And so, the struggle is real and the challenges are very great in this region, but this activism gives me great reason for feeling optimistic about the future.
Thank you very much, Kate. And we do share your optimism. We have to remain optimistic, so we appreciate you reminding us of that. Udo?
Thank you very much. I think I'm also optimistic. Hearing a sitting vice president of an African country speak this passionately about what needs to be done reinforces that belief that, within the political leadership, we understand the risks and there is some determination to see that things are done properly. We would never, ever underplay the importance of leaders in country in making change happen. Because essentially, the exercise of that power is a way we can actually redress what has happened in the country. And for us, and as Vice President Jude always says, the effectiveness of leadership is also built on the quality of demand in country. And so civil society, the media, and grassroots voices must be a constant source of our interest in making sure that they're as vocal and effective as possible to help the leaders make the right kind of decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Udo. And finally, Your Excellency, Vice President Jallow, any closing point of optimism? What keeps you hopeful? And close us out with some reflection.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Like I said, there is now a growing consciousness within the continent about the red flag, meaning that heads of state have had the opportunity to exchange with a couple of them. Heads of state, when the coup took place in Guinea, so many heads of state called me. Prime ministers and foreign ministers called me. What is happening in your neighboring countries? It shows that there is that consciousness that something needs to be done. You understand? And that in itself gives you hope that these people now, not these people, we are now aware that we have to do something. We have to strengthen these regional bodies. We have to strengthen, like Excellency Chambers said, the sanction regime. But even beyond the sanction regime, we have to support the process of building that kind of solidarity. And I don't believe that the sanction regime takes away sovereignty. The sanction regime does not take away sovereignty, in the sense that if ECOWAS strengthens the sanction regime, it's within the West African country, does not take away sovereignty. And also, even for international financial institutions, if they strengthen their sanction regime, it does not mean they are taking away the sovereignty, because they even sanction countries like Russia and countries like China. And these are countries that are bigger than us. Sanctioning a country does not mean, you understand it? I just want to come back to where we started as a closing remarks. The difference between the European Union and the African institution, the European Union is built around common values. That you become a member of the European Union when you share the fundamental values of human rights, rule of law, respect for these, and then a liberal economy, a liberal open market economy. This is what should drive the African institutions. A value system, respect for rule of law, respect for democracy, respect for open market. And I'm seeing a shift now today particularly with ECOWAS. ECOWAS is now moving to supporting African countries to build shared economic infrastructure, like electrification project, to reduce the tariff of electrification. We have seen it with the CLSG line that runs from Abidjan to Monrovia to Guinea and to Sierra Leone, which is good. These are some of the things we are doing. And I believe, like I said, there's optimism, and I'll be rest assured that when we have opportunity to engage at the regional and continental level, these are the discourses that are going to expand. These are the kind of discourses. And I'm happy that today you have also spurred me further to rethink how what is happening now can further remodel. So I want to thank you very much for organizing this, because I didn't make any notes to come here. So so it has given me an opportunity to further build my reflection around some of these issues you have raised. So I want to thank you very much, but I'm optimistic that at least these red flags are a signpost to rethink how to address that reverse and put these regional bodies in a position so that they can be able to help us in building and strengthening democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President, for those instructive words of reflection that still maintain optimism, but also give us that cautionary signpost and warning that there's an opportunity to reset and redirect. To all our speakers, we're tremendously grateful for this really engaging and lively discussion. We thank all our attendees who have tuned in from across the world, on the continent and off, and here in the United States. And we hope this will be the beginning of additional conversations that help us to interrogate this significantly important question about the wellness and the well-being of our democratic institutions in Africa. With that, I thank you very much, and we wish you well.